Ah. Well, welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks Show. Apologies we missed last week, but if your week was bad because you missed out on our dulcet tones, I assure you I'll give you ultimate this week, Brian. Our ultimate Warriors fan, Brian Foster's, was worst. Because we missed the show because of fire, because your state was on fire, and then in the midst of that, the star player of your team went down injured. So I'll let you get first crack on the show, Brian, then I'll do introductions. We can get going.
Yeah, the fires were rough. They're still going down in other parts of the state, so I hope all those people are okay. But in terms of the Warriors, the biggest consensus I've been seeing on Warriors Twitter is, oh, thank God we are back finally to the real Warriors once again. This winning is all over with. We're finally looking ahead to mock drafts and who we're going to get in the lottery, although they've been trading their first-round draft picks away. So, the bad Warriors makes Warriors fans feel a lot more comfortable.
Okay, so I'm your host, Ray Alvarez, a.k.a. Nerd Numbers. You just heard from Brian Foster, our voice of God, man of many hats. What was the other one? I always forget the third one. Whatever, Brian. And we're going to just be talking NBA. As mentioned, we've been off for a week, so we're just kind of all over the place. And then, of course, there's so much NBA news. Big shout out to Greg Steele, who has actually been fueling the content of the site. We've been going over his off-season grades that he gave us in the middle of the offseason, Brian, to at least have something out. But the good news for you all is it's because Patrick and I are working behind the scenes to get all the numbers up. There are actually wins produced numbers on the Boxscore Geeks site at the team pages. The players pages has a bug, which we are working on. But so that is the good news. We can look over, and rest assured we will look over how some of our players are doing great. Brian, I'm not going to get my Donovan Mitchell hate card punch this week because he's been playing fantastic, and I've got more things to insult on the Jazz than him. So we're just going to get into it. We're going to talk some fights. We're going to talk minute allocation. We're going to talk disappointments and surprises in the NBA season and just hopefully get back in the groove, and then we'll see you next week with more. Before we get started, I want to talk to you about our sponsor, dailyroto.com. So, basketball season's back. So if you play daily fantasy sports, especially in NBA, having a great site with up-to-date news, optimizers, ratings is key. If you go to dailyroto.com and use promo code NERDNUMBERS, I believe you get 10% off of the season. And yeah, if you are interested in daily fantasy sports in football, basketball, baseball is done. The World Series is all over, but they'll be back next year if you want it. Go ahead and do that. dailyroto.com. Nerd Numbers. Did I repeat that enough, Brian? I think I did proper commercial etiquette. Could have just done the head-on thing, but we'll move on. And you all know what I'm talking about, I hope. Head-on is a viral infomercial where they just basically say the name of the product like 20 times. They just say head-on, head-on, head-on. I don't even know what it does, but that is the name of the product.
Maybe they should have said more in the commercial.
No, I mean, I think name recognition probably trumps having a well outline of the product, especially if it's an infomercial product. If I knew more, I'd probably it's the stupidest freaking thing I've ever heard. Whereas head-on, now I kind of want to Google it, so maybe that worked. Maybe we'll get them as a sponsor next time.
There we go.
Let's start out. So an interesting start of the season where I do have some salt to it as well is Karl-Anthony Towns and Embiid got in a fight. And I believe both got suspended just a couple of games. So I've noticed,
apiece, yeah.
I've noticed some other people bring up that, for instance, when Carmelo Anthony got in his infamous fight a few years ago, but wow, almost a decade ago now, the same year Allen Iverson came to the squad, Carmelo Anthony got suspended for a quarter of the season. So this seems tame in comparison. At the same time, another part of this that's frustrating is a theme we come back to all the time, which is the annoying kind of pervasive, annoying machismo culture in sports that we're just never a fan of. Because, of course, Embiid after the fight, hyped up the crowd and then went to social media and insulted Karl-Anthony Towns, saying, I was raised in with Lions, you were raised with Cubs, whatever, some bullshit. And it's this weird, we just don't really like that culture and this weird nature of trying to say, I'm the toughest, I'm the biggest, I'm going to prove I'm the best by beating you, especially since they are doing a physical activity against each other to prove who's better. So it's not as if saying, hey, I can fight you proves any damn thing when you're already got a huge contest going on. And I'm never a fan of this culture. And then another weird thing, I think I brought this up before. So one of my favorite podcasters, Jack O'Brien, who's at the Daily Zeitgeist, formerly of Cracked, He's actually from a huge lineage of NBA coaches. And I've heard him talk about fights in basketball before. In particular, there was a fight the Lakers had, I believe, 2 years ago. And Lonzo Ball just left the fight, didn't engage. And Jack O'Brien was like, he insulted him, actually used a word I don't like using, that's come up all the time in sports, to insult someone's masculinity. And I was like, that's weird, right? Like, from an outside perspective, this idea of a fight breaks out at work and you are considered weak for not getting involved, especially when we just brought up it's a 2-game suspension, right? I don't know. I know Embiid is on his max contract now. I do not, and Karl-Anthony Towns has to be as well, right? So they're both on a max contract.
Yep.
So that's 20 to 30 million a year. Not hard math. You divide that by 80, right? So they're getting like $250,000 a game essentially. So they don't get paid if they're suspended. So that's like $500,000 to $1 million fine each. That is a ludicrous thing, and I don't care how much anybody insults your manliness. That is not something I think anybody would ever be okay with. You and me, Brian, right? Like if you went into work and a fight broke out in the break room and then your boss came up to you at the end of the day and was like, Brian, I appreciate that you didn't get involved in the fight, but you really should have. And you go, if I got involved, what would have happened? Your boss goes, well, I would have docked you 2 days of pay and sent you home. You'd be like, well, what are you talking about? But in sports, that is considered a normal narrative. So just bring this up again. It's nothing new, but fighting in sports is not anything that we're ever that impressed with or think is good. And normally we love Joel Embiid on social media. He says some funny stuff. He's a great troll. This is not a case where I'm going to side. No need for fighting. Doesn't prove a damn thing. Not a fan of this.
Yeah, and that's what it is we probably take fighting a little bit more seriously than he does. Like, he's treating it like a pro wrestling heel, basically, like you said, cheering up the crowd afterwards and all that. But I think Ben Simmons put Towns in a chokehold and all that. Like, these are fights. Like, we've seen players have injuries in fights before. We've seen players, I think in baseball, like there's a famous one, John Roseborough. In basketball, Rudy Tomjanovich as well, right? Like players almost having their careers ended because of fights. Really serious stuff. So this is dumb. And just to use your like break room analogy here, so players like Towns and Embiid, if to put them in the hierarchy of business, they're making tens of millions of dollars a year. They're like C-level, Fortune 500 CEOs basically in terms of who they are in the hierarchy. So so you're going to lose those guys for 2 games because of this? Like, that's not a good thing for the teams at all. So I think, with wrestling and heel stuff aside, like it's a big net loss for the teams, and it's just foolishness.
Yeah, and that's just, we bring that up a lot where there are these weird mentalities. It occurs to me, I don't know exactly where it is. We're probably not going to talk at the show at all, if any, which is the NCAA and kind of the moving forward, and then kind of noticing these weird undertones. But, these weird ideas in sports where it's considered normal to say, hey, you're weak if you don't do this. Hey, you're entitled if you do this, where you look in other places, it's not the same. And that is a thing in sports that is still the case, which is to say getting in fights, proving something to other people, that kind of mentality is not as productive as people think. And in fact, that's going to get us onto our next topic. So this was an interesting one that came about. It got one of our favorite people, Brian Ohringer. I don't understand how this person has a name for himself in basketball analytics, but
I don't know much about him except I see him like trolling people all the time, basically. Ohringer
was a video scout for the Wizards, Hawks, I think one other team. And he's infamous for saying stupid stuff repeatedly. He's almost a professional troll at this point. He really belongs at Barstool Sports. For those that don't know, Barstool Sports is just a really misogynistic and problematic sports company, is what it is. But so Brian Ohringer, one of his claims to fame is he was basically saying that men could beat women in WNBA games, and his proof was that he used to play pickup basketball games with the training staff of the Wizards and could occasionally hold his own. Ergo, men could beat women in professional basketball, which is a ludicrous notion. But he was he even got into the fray on this, which is RJ Barrett is a player on the Knicks that has played like over 40 minutes a game. The last 3 games is averaging over 37 minutes. That's a lot because if you look the last couple of years in the NBA, 34 to 36 minutes is kind of the top. And if you look historically, that number has been coming down as teams realize basically conditioning and keeping players healthy. Teams like the Spurs years ago started picking this up, resting older players on back-to-backs to keep them healthy for the postseason. Phil Jackson infamously said he would do this with Shaq. He just wanted Shaq playoff ready. So Shaq would miss 10 to 15 games a season under Phil Jackson. And, they did all right, right? They made 4 finals, winning 3 of them. So modern players just don't really play as many minutes or play as many back-to-backs as older players. And RJ Barrett was saying he's a young player, he'll be fine. And what's frustrating when we were talking these annoying, pervasive myths, Brian Ohringer even jumped in to say, players back in the day used to do this all the time. Modern players that can't, just need to man up, basically. And that's frustrating. And one of the names that kept coming up was Michael Jordan. And this baffled me. And I said this before I even saw Brian Ohringer's tweet. I said it in response to somebody else. I forget whose name. I don't feel the need to say it. I already gave way too much attention to Brian. But I brought up that if you were going to look at Michael Jordan for saying Michael Jordan was able to play over 40 minutes a game and had a long and fruitful career, one, he didn't enter the league until he was 21. He played 3 years in college. A modern NBA player of Michael Jordan's caliber plays 1 year in school, one and done player. As recently as, LeBron James, they would have come straight from high school, but, that the one and done is still in effect until the next CBA. Michael Jordan missed his second NBA season almost entirely. I think he played like 15 to 17 games, missed over 60 games in his second season. Don't forget, he retired after the Dream Team Olympics and played professional base or minor league baseball for a season and a half. So, left 2 seasons on the table. And then he retired after he was 35. So it is bizarre to me for anybody to say Michael Jordan proves that you can play 40 minutes a game and be fine when you're like, this guy missed, this guy basically, if we're looking at a modern NBA player, missed 4.5 seasons of a regular season's prime compared to a normal player. Do you really think it's the same? I also saw Tim Duncan brought up as a name, and Tim Duncan played 4 years in college. And then, of course, after he was 29, had his minutes monitored. So this weird idea of saying players that, can't play over 40 minutes a game need to just man up. Another player that hopped in with this was actually Rookie of the Year. That was kind of his only claim to fame, Damon Stoudemire, saying, hey, I played over 40 minutes a game and I had a 13-year career. It is baffling to see people go, back in my day, we were able to do it, so modern people should, and does get us into this very weird age divide or whatever, where you're going, medicine, conditioning, et cetera, has improved. And also the value, it's kind of a weird way to phrase it, but the value of a player to a team. We were just talking Karl-Anthony Towns and Joel Embiid. These players are $20 to $30 million a year investments. Is upping your chance of winning a game 10 to 20% really worth, $80 million? A funny note, a player we're going to talk is Eric Gordon. I didn't realize this initially, Brian. Eric Gordon signed a 4-year extension. He's basically owed $80 million and is signed through the next 4 seasons with the Rockets. $80 million. That is a mind-boggling amount of money and investment. So it's like you'd really want to protect that investment. So all these people going, players today are soft. The real way to view it is to go, players today are a huge investment, and we have learned over years and years and years that we really do need to take care of them or they break down. And if we have a player like Karl-Anthony Towns, Joel Embiid, RJ Barrett, right? I mean, he's on a rookie contract. He's not expensive, but that's still a 4 to 7 year potential for your team. Playing the wheels off of them is just not the way to go. Excuse me.
Yeah, and you know what this is making me think of is this meme that's been popping up lately called the boomer trolley problem. Have you seen that meme yet, Trey?
So I know. So the trolley problem, if you're using the one I'm familiar with, is you've got a trolley on a track. I'm going to take a brief tangent and say this problem and hypothetical is stupid, and I hate survey results anyway. So I'm going to start with that because it is a survey. It's going, you've got a trolley. In real time, this trolley is about to hit one person or hit 4 people, but you see a switch. If you pull the switch, it switches and it can kill one person. Do you pull the switch? A huge shout out to the show The Good Place, where they actually, in my opinion, did the most perfect recreation of this because they have like a virtual reality simulation of the trolley problem. And what ends up happening is the character fails because exactly what we're saying. They're saying you have to make this decision. It's in real time. And he gets so flustered, he doesn't make a choice and kills the 4 people. And to me, that's with a lot of these philosophy problems, with economics problems, this idea of being able to have perfect real-time information and perfect judgment has always been a pet peeve of mine. But that is the trolley problem. I am told you can either kill 4 people or kill 1 person. Which do you choose? And then there are all sorts of weird variants as to how you switch up the phrasing of that problem to make people change different things. But you're saying there's a boomer variant. So how does the boomer variant work?
It's a meme, it's about utilitarianism, right? And does it, if you intervene, does that make it better or worse, right? So and I agree with you, right? Because in real life, you just yell at the people and say, "Hey, move out of the way," right? Like it's a dumb concept. So here's the boomer trolley problem. So let's read the tweet that this is in reply to. Someone says, "I fundamentally believe, quote, I suffered so you should too, is a shitty way to live. It's morally bad, politically bad, just bad for your heart." Exactly. So, and then this is good. At Sleep 500 posts this, something I'd like to call the boomer trolley problem. So what is this guy who has the decision to make about switching the trolley on the track saying in this meme? He says, "Would it be fair to the people the trolley has already killed to divert it now?" So he can either choose to run over more people or no more people at all, and he's choosing to run over more people.
By the way, thank you, because you're letting me get a tangent on this thing that's shown up. I actually told off a relative at a gathering, actually a liberal, funny, over this thing, because basically the idea of free college education came up, and they said that the thing you just heard, right? Well, I paid off my college tuition. I don't know how I feel about someone else getting it for free. And I said, you are one step away from being a Republican with that talk. Stop it. Obviously, I'm using that as an insult, and hopefully it worked. But this weird idea of saying, I don't want to help out other people because I had it rough. What bugs me about that in terms of both like healthcare, education, and even the NBA, we'll get to that in a second, is going, that is the wrong schema to think about that problem. The real way to think about the problem, and this, by the way, I apologize for turning this into a crass capitalist way of thinking about it, Brian, is people are an investment, right? If we think of education is an investment in my future. I'm stealing something from Hank Green, the Vlog brothers. He was talking about this, about why he doesn't have a problem paying taxes for good schools, even though he doesn't have kids, because he says educating people turns them into productive members of society, which helps society as a whole be better, which is a good thing. So when people are saying, do I really want to help future kids not have student debt? You go, yes, because that makes society as a whole better, because you get educated people that aren't burdened with bad jobs that aren't useful, that are able to help society in meaningful ways. That is a good thing. And what you were saying about the NBA too, where we were talking about these weird machismo things where people are going, I was able to play 40 minutes. Why should these guys? You brought up a key point, albeit it wasn't about injury, it was about suspension, but I would say both are the same.
Yeah.
When a star player like Steph Curry is out injured, it hurts the quality of the league. And in fact, we know this from Dave Barry's research back in the day. A star player like Steph Curry is not actually good for the Golden State Warriors with the old model. The old model was you would get a bulk of your money from house shows, from basically people coming and paying ticket admissions to watch the game. That has changed up a little with television, but this actually applies to that as well. So basically the Golden State Warriors, if they wanted to maximize their home attendance, they would want a winning team, because even if you have Steph Curry, eventually people go, you're a losing team. I've already seen Steph Curry once. I don't want to see him again. But Steph Curry on the road is a good thing because people will show up to see Steph Curry. So if Steph Curry is injured, what you have now done is you have now made it so that when the Warriors, who are now a bad team, go on the road, people are less likely to want to see them, whereas they would have wanted to see Steph Curry because he's a star. When Joel Embiid and Karl-Anthony Towns are out, it is bad because it makes a worse product that people are less likely going to want to tune in and watch, which hurts the NBA's negotiations for future TV deals, or come to show, see the game, which hurts either the gate revenue of the Philadelphia 76ers or the Timberwolves or their opponents. So it is better for the league to have healthy stars that have long careers. It is a bizarre thing to say. I was able to tell, Damon Stoudemire, who, by the way, after his first couple seasons, didn't play 40 minutes a game anymore, did have a couple injured seasons, and did cap out after 13 years. You want LeBron James in the league as long as you can. You want Steph Curry in the league as long as you can. You want a competitive, good-looking LeBron James, Steph Curry, because that helps the quality of the league. So these mindsets that are, it is weak if you don't get in a fight. It is weak if you don't put your body through more strain, when that actually makes a worse product, is bad. And that's one of the reasons we're against this.
Yeah, and I'll answer that comment with yet another meme, which is this was posted by @thefarmerjones, and I won't say who's in the image, but what he said was, the struggle is real for Warriors slander Twitter. And that's a big deal, right, Trey? People like hating on the Warriors. We talked about it a lot, about how the Warriors were an unfair team. We should cancel the league, until all of a sudden they weren't an unfair team, right? So obviously that happened. But the first reply is, well, I wish for the Warriors' downfall for so long, but not like this. This is some monkey paw shit. And the reply is, when the Warriors dynasty is officially dead, but it's so dead you can't even slander Steph. And there's a sad Wario meme, I've won it, but at what cost? So, yeah, Steph's not even playing. Like this. It's just a team full of G League players now, and the Warriors haters are not even getting satisfaction, apparently.
Well, let's get to NBA disappointments, and we'll start with that. So Steph Curry was injured. Now, admittedly, what was rough is he was having kind of a rough start to the season, but with players like Steph Curry and James Harden, they're three-point shooters, and that means they have high volatility. But one of the things that I like as a proof, so I'm upset. Steph Curry is one of my favorite players. Steph Curry and Kevin Durant, I've written reams about how they're some of the most special scorers in NBA history. I want them healthy to break records. That is one of the things. I am such a huge fan of milestones, of like record-breaking NBA seasons, that kind of stuff. So when I'm deprived of that, the exact thing I was just saying, where I was like, a worse product is worse for everybody, I'm upset. So the fact that we have a year where Steph Curry and Kevin Durant are not in the league is upsetting to me. But so the Warriors, though, proved an interesting theme with team construction, because I'm anti-tank. I keep bringing up this talk, and I'm eventually going to put a write-up on the site about that I gave at the Great Lakes Analytics Conference about tanking. Now the NBA has messed up incentives. And here's an annoying position. Everybody's starting to joke about the Warriors tanking now. And the frustrating part for you, Brian, is that is probably the right maneuver. And the reason is the Warriors made these kind of like what people were arguing were intermediary moves. So as an example, they traded Kevin Durant for D'Angelo Russell. The logic being, as we kind of discussed on the show, that if you just let Kevin Durant walk, your salary cap is filled up with Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, and Draymond Green. So you're not going to be able to acquire another player. Whereas if you trade for D'Angelo Russell, you now have a trade asset where if you need to acquire $20 to $30 million in a player or players, you have a player that also has trade value you can get for it.
And this is the defense for Eric Gordon on the Rockets, by the way, that the Rockets need him to keep their salary cap artificially high. But go ahead.
That is one that I've heard, but and that was Paul DeVos, DataFox 21 on Twitter. Great follow if you don't follow him. I, to a degree, agree with that, but we're going to talk more about that in a sec. Eric Gordon's up next. But the issue with trading for D'Angelo Russell, though, is you're not allowed to trade him until mid-January. And that's actually the case.
Is it December 15th or 17th?
I thought it was January. Based on the ESPN trade machine, they say he's got to hold until January, I thought. It might be. But regardless, that's at least a month, at least a couple. By that time, Warriors are going to be in a big hole. And the same is true, for instance, of Willie Cauley-Stein. Klay Thompson is injured and on a big contract. They're not trading him for anything. So basically, and even if they wanted to, right, Klay's in the same boat as D'Angelo Russell. They can't trade Klay for a couple months because they just signed into a big deal. They can't trade D'Angelo for a couple months. This team can't really make any moves. They could. It would be a fun exercise. I would enjoy it to try and moneyball, with a salary cap of like $30 million, moneyball a playoff team that might be able to get Steph Curry back or whatever and play. Unfortunately, this is one of Patrick's preseason bets. We were going to compliment some of them because Patrick did go back to Vegas, put some bets down on what he thinks is going to happen in the NBA season. He basically said, hey, Steph Curry is amazing. So, any team with Steph Curry has an outside shot of winning the division, which is definitely true. Unfortunately, that ain't happening now with Steph Curry injured, as well as a couple other players. So the Warriors, though, kind of prove a point that we make about team construction, which is you don't really want to get bad players on the team because you always run the risk that, one, your coach ends up playing them, or two, you end up in the situation here where you're locked and you can't do anything and you basically are just going to have to tank. And as we keep arguing, a lost season in terms of revenue, et cetera, is likely not going to get paid back on a draft pick. People will think of players like Nikola Jokic, or, more accurate, like Ben Simmons that paid off. But the reality is most top, even 3 picks do not turn into stars. So you really shouldn't expect that. So this is really just a bummer for the Warriors. There's not much else to say about it. And all we can go is I always get trepidations about intermediary moves like D'Angelo Russell for that exact reason, which is you don't know if he's going to get injured and you're not going to be able to trade him. Or if his value tanks, or if the coach likes him, that kind of stuff.
He is hurt right now, by the way.
Exactly. So not having bad players on your team really is a good strategy. And it's kind of frustrating to see it happen with the Warriors. I'm not particularly worried. I think long-term, your team has a lot of clout in being in the Bay Area and being in a nice arena. And now it actually does have some banners and some prestige to it. And Steph Curry is going to be on the team. So I don't think this team's going to be like the Warriors of old. I think you were telling me that the previous owner was one that just, was not interested in making winning basketball.
Yeah.
And even if he's not good at it, Lacob does at least seem to want to win. So we'll have to see where it goes from there.
Yeah, and the previous owner, Chris Cohan, famously put a non-basketball guy in charge of basketball operations, Robert Rao, and everyone was really upset about that. But, so you had a really good point about this, and it was an article you wrote, I think, a while back about the Spurs. It's kind of a myth that they tanked to get Tim Duncan, right?
Yeah, I did tweet that out today because,
exactly.
Of course, with Steph Curry going down, everybody's saying it's time for them to pull the Spurs. And first off, I don't know who the number 1 pick is in the upcoming draft. Apologies if someone else knows or it is a big name. But Tim Duncan's like a once a decade type of player. Like we were saying the same thing. Like Ben Simmons was the first player since Tim Duncan to be as productive as he was as a rookie on a playoff squad. It is very rare for that to happen. So expecting that. But then the second part, thanks for letting me off on this tangent, Brian. I wrote about this and I linked it on my Twitter. I'll see if I do the show notes this week if I put it in there. But yeah, the Spurs tried to play David Robinson and he got injured again. So the Spurs did not intentionally sit David Robinson to try and get Tim Duncan. They were playing horribly without David Robinson. David Robinson got healthy for 6 games. They brought him back. He got injured again. Then they lost the season. Two of the players, Vinny Del Negro and Avery Johnson, just got older at the right time. Basically, if they'd played
Sean Elliott was hurt too. They didn't have a choice, right? The Spurs had no choice on whether they wanted to tank or not.
And admittedly, that is the situation we now end up with the Warriors.
Right.
So it might look out the same. But yeah, I think one of our pet peeves about the Warriors is this light years, right? The light years meme, the Lacob light years ahead. Because what we pointed out is essentially he inherited a good squad, right? Curry and Draymond were already on that team that he bought. And then all of the finals MVPs for that squad, Andre Iguodala and Kevin Durant, who, amount of 3 of the finals MVPs that team got in their 3 finals wins, forced their way on the squad. One of my nice name droppy stories is when I was at Sloan a few years back before Steve Kerr had actually signed with the Warriors. I ran into Myers and Kerr because they were talking at Sloan. Who knows what they were talking about? As I mentioned, Kerr wasn't on the squad yet.
Oh, that's
and
funny.
I ran into them, and I basically told Myers, I was like, I'm really upset that you took Andre Iguodala from the Nuggets, and he actually shrugged, and you said he has been very nice in that he admits this publicly. He doesn't do the false bravado thing and say it was a brilliant move. I actually have a lot of respect for Myers and how straightforward he is at times, where he said, yeah, Iguodala wanted to be on the squad and we didn't think we could make it work. And he and his agent really wanted it to work. And it's like, that won him a title, right? Like,
Yeah.
Andre Iguodala won the Warriors, helped the Warriors to a title. It was huge because, he was worth a lot of wins in the regular season. He won the Finals MVP. People argue he probably shut down LeBron James. I don't know how true that is. So it's like this team lucked into the stars that won it for him. So I do sincerely hope that if the same thing happens again, right, if they luck into a great draft pick who turns into a future star, that people aren't going to go, oh, this was a clear plan. They planned to tank. It's like, no, Curry injured his wrist a few games into the season, and all of your players were on locked contracts that you couldn't move. And you were actually humongously stupid to trade for D'Angelo Russell and to sign Klay Thompson long. And if it works out for you, great, but let's please not act like it was a smart strategy.
Yeah, that's right. So they're stuck tanking now, but we definitely question their process heading into this season. In fact, during the last few seasons, we've questioned it too. That the results have been great, but what's going on behind the scenes here, and it did finally catch up with them. So when Kevin Durant joined the team, we keep getting back to this over and over again. What Patrick wrote about it is that, there's some concern. There's not going to be enough balls to go around, which we thought was stupid. But what Patrick said was, yeah, but it protects against injury, right? This way, if either Curry or Durant gets hurt, they have the other one there. They can still make a big run. And that's been true. The Warriors were so loaded during those Durant years, not just with Durant and Curry, but all these other players too, that they sustained all kinds of injuries and still, won many titles and were close to winning others. So that all changed this offseason, right? They just shed all of their – they couldn't have kept Durant. We know that now. And it's come out recently that supposedly the reason why Draymond Green's famous tirade against Durant happened during that game is because he already knew Durant was gone. Doesn't excuse the tirade. It was still a stupid tirade. But apparently they knew for a long time he was going to be gone. So they had all this time to prepare. And they could have just reloaded with veterans and, a couple of young players and just gone for another title run. And they just chose not to, right? They chose to bring in all these young players. And then and Klay Thompson they chose to bring back, who they knew was going to miss the whole season. And you're stuck with, only Curry and Green, really. Curry gets hurt, and then that's it, right? There's not really any playoff hopes. So past Warriors teams, they could have survived a Curry injury. So yes, they have no choice but to tank now. It's not really tanking then. It's just being a bad team. But they set this up in the offseason by just not bringing in any talent at all.
One thing you were noting that was frustrating about this team is you're able to get away with the stupid small ball trope, right, that I argued wasn't even really true when they had Kevin Durant, because Kevin Durant is 7 feet, right? I think it has to have been updated. I haven't checked the heights, but has to be near there now. And it's not really small ball if you have Draymond Green, Andre Iguodala, Klay Thompson, and Kevin Durant. That's not small ball, right? You have some players that are oversized for their position, and you kind of are able to get away with that. But that requires you having Kevin Durant and Draymond Green and Klay Thompson. And so when two of those players are missing, having good players is fine. And we noticed they did not really spend their time acquiring other players like that. For years, you've been lamenting their lack of a big, like a traditional big, and they didn't never really, like they got JaVale McGee kind of.
Let me give some nuance there. But here's what my complaint was. They got a lot out of JaVale McGee, Zaza Pachulia, other players that David West is another great example, right? They were cheapskates and spent so little money, but they got so much out of those players. And maybe that's skill, but I thought it was kind of hedging, and maybe they were getting a little bit lucky, right? Well, that finally caught up with them this year. They basically only brought in Willie Cauley-Stein, and he's playing okay, but he's been a little bit hurt too. So they just, they rolled the dice one too many times.
Well, to the bigger point about what you're saying, this weird lowballing is they didn't get anybody that was sustained on the team. They were kind of counting that these players would take a discount to play for a title. And that works great when you have multiple stars and think you have a title run. But then when Kevin Durant leaves and you're like, and Klay Thompson's out for the season, you're not going to get a discounted like DeMarcus Cousins for $5 million a year trying to win a title. So that's been kind of the issue that they've had, right? Is that instead of stockpiling players that were going to help them for the future, we've made this point about the Spurs when they were good. We've called it perpetual maintenance mode, is that you should always be trying to keep your team healthy and improve it, because teams always atrophy. That's just what happens. The average player lifespan in the NBA is about 6 seasons. So you really can't be thinking this player is going to be here for a decade. You should always be improving the team. And then to what you've kind of pointed about Kevin Durant, they knew for years when his contract was up. And so it's like they really needed a contingency if that was going to happen, and clearly they did not have a good one.
And it was reported that the sign and trade for D'Angelo Russell was a last-minute thing. It was not prepared.
And I mean, that's absolutely horrible. And it's a funny point that I brought up before about the Warriors, where I've called them like no plan B team, which is their plan A seemed great. So like a few years ago when Jeremy Britton got really high on them and was writing about them, like they had plan A's like, let's go for Nene and Iguodala. Let's go for Dwight Howard. Remember they offered DeAndre
Jordan.
A max contract, but he was matched by the Clippers. So like they had great plan A's. We're like, that is a fantastic plan. And then when those plans failed, they were like, what about Kwame Brown? And you're like, wait, what? And so that's the same thing. They're like, what if Klay Thompson and Kevin Durant come back healthy? We'll be great. And it's like, well, what if they don't? And they're like, well, if they don't, we're going to get D'Angelo Russell and give Klay Thompson a bunch of money anyway. And that's always been their kind of MO. And we kind of find that inexcusable, to be mean. It's like exactly what you're saying. If you're an NBA team and you have a star player and their contract is up, we think the right maneuver to do is what they did, right? You play Kevin Durant and still go for a title, but you have to have something in mind. And if you've been as you were saying, lowballing old veterans to 1-year deals, and now you don't have anybody in the cupboard, well, you can't be waiting until you're trading your players to restock those. You should be finding something. And I mean, that is the deal about being an NBA team or a front office. And so we see this happen all the time, and it's very frustrating, especially if it's a team we like.
One thing I'll say is they did come into the season relatively healthy aside from Klay and just had all these injuries all of a sudden. They looked terrible even with Curry and Green playing and healthy. And they got blown out by, I think, 30 points and 20 points the first 2 games with Curry. So and there was some talk kind of heading into the season that, we know our expectations aren't going to be so good. So I'm not sure exactly what their mindset was this offseason. I guess there's one of 2 big possibilities. Maybe they were tanking a little bit. Maybe they're like, well, we won overall titles. We have this new stadium. That's good enough. We're just going to keep plodding ahead, right? I think it's more likely, though, that they just aren't that good evaluating talent. They just thought these players were good, and they really aren't. Like, it's sorry to say.
Well, I mean, especially as we noted, when a bulk of their success came from players that were already on the squad or that forced their way into the squad, we don't really know what they're doing. And that was always kind of one of my, like, I'm glad it didn't happen, but I was really curious what would have happened if Kevin Durant didn't come to the squad. Were they going to re-sign Harrison Barnes? And it's looking like the answer to that was yes. So
that was the reporting.
All right, let's talk a few more disappointments I have. Brian, if you have any more you want to heap on, you can do that. Another one, we were talking a little bit about this, but Eric Gordon, one of our favorite players to bash, one of the worst offseason signings. He was signed for 4 years, $80 million around there to the Rockets, and is playing horribly. And the phrase I'll give this, because I'm going to talk another team in a second, the Utah Jazz, but the Rockets are just wasted potential, right? When you have James Harden and Russell Westbrook and Clint Capella on a squad together, you just need to get some other good players, even just decent players to play with them. And I swear, Eric Gordon for $20 million is just inexcusable. As you were noting, the possibility that Paul DeVos brought up is that the Rockets signed Eric Gordon, so now they have a $20 million asset if they want to trade for another player. And while I can agree with that, I think the reality is they really could have traded like Eric Gordon at the trade deadline to a team that needed relief for a player that was, around 10, 15 million a season for the, on a couple of years. Like, I give that logic credence to, basically say you need a player that you can trade because if you're over the salary cap, that's the only way you can acquire new players. But to the exact thing we were saying about the Warriors, the time to do that was the trade deadline last season or the offseason. If the Rockets are going to keep losing games and then just hope that they're going to be able to trade Eric Gordon into a better player midseason, they might be able to, but we're just not a fan of that strategy.
Yeah, same thing with D'Angelo Russell, right? It's just too convoluted to sign this player and then try to figure out how to turn them around months later. Like, just get all that done when you can and just go for it, right? And so that's why I agree with you. I think that the reality is they just like Eric Gordon, think he's a good player, and we don't, so we disagree with them. And it's a shame because, so first of all, the Rockets will probably be fine. In addition to those three players, like, I like their other role players a lot more than usual this season. PJ Tucker is still there and looking great, even though he's older. Daniel House Jr. has emerged, former Warrior, by the way. The Warriors let him go. Daniel House looks great. They have Tyson Chandler now, Dre. Remember that? He is playing like the old Tyson Chandler. They have Thabo Cephalosha, who's back and healthy, and he looks good too. They are loaded this year. They just have to keep Austin Rivers and Eric Gordon off the court, and they should be a big-time title contender.
Well, you're more optimistic than me, but we'll see if it happens. Maybe they. What happened before in past is like Eric Gordon got injured, and they started winning with him injured. So, and then when he was injured, they picked up Fareed. So we'll see what happens there.
Harden doesn't look like himself so far. I don't know why exactly. Maybe he's just it's turnovers. His turnovers and fouls look pretty bad, but he'll be fine.
Well, I was going to say a few things. One, you're picking an odd night to say that because I believe he's going off tonight, or at least what.
There you go.
So let's see. I'll risk an autoplay ad and look at NBA.com.
He's also at 21.5% on threes. You know that's going to go up. So there you go.
Yeah, he had like a 1 for 9, 1 for 12 games, which you can't expect that.
Small sample size.
All right. Well, I guess I got overly optimistic. 6 for 15, double with rebounds tonight. Those turnovers are a bit high, but no, James Harden is fine, but Eric Gordon is just bad for that team. And I think you're right. There is a winning team in there, but there are bad players that can keep that team from being a winning team, much like the next team I wanted to talk about. As I mentioned, my Donovan Mitchell hate card is going to go unpunched this week. He is playing spectacularly for the Jazz. We kind of have said this point, which is to say young players can improve. And our complaint about Donovan Mitchell was always he did not deserve the role he had on the squad. You really don't want to give a rookie point guard that many minutes and that many shots, especially when they are playing like he was playing. And he's gotten a little older, and if he keeps it up this season, he could be a great player. And, I've kind of joked that I've been expecting this, where it's Russell Westbrook was a player that for years when he was getting all-star nods, we were calling him overrated. And then he turned into an MVP player, and we looked at his numbers and said, yeah, he's an MVP caliber player. And then everybody was saying, remember when you said Russell Westbrook sucked? And I'm like, yeah, when we said he sucked, he did suck. Now he's great. Now we say he's great. And as I mentioned, it was very much the Batman 2, the one with Harvey Dent and Joker, where he's like, you live long enough, if you're the hero, you live long enough to see yourself become a villain. It's like Russell Westbrook, I get to watch it long enough to see people suddenly turn on him and say, oh, he's overrated and he's stealing rebounds and, these are hollow stats and all this. And I'm like, no, his numbers are good. So it's some weird kind of hell. And I've joked that Donovan Mitchell is going to follow the same trajectory where he's going to turn into a good player. I'm going to say he's a good player. And he's going to say, remember when you said he was a bad player? And I was like, yeah, he was a bad player then. But then, the good news, if it follows the Russell Westbrook train. Well, that was a hard sentence to say there, Brian. But if he follows that, then I'm going to watch people turn on him and call him overrated. So at least I got that to look forward to in 5 or 6 seasons. But the problem with that is the Jazz in the offseason did some weird moves. As I mentioned, big thanks to Greg Steele for providing the only content we've had for the last couple of weeks. But he graded the offseason moves, and he wasn't a huge fan of the Mike Conley signing. And we kind of said Mike Conley is a productive player, but he's definitely older. I don't know if he was really a big replacement to Ricky Rubio. If anything, it was a lateral move, and Mike Conley's older and more beat up. I think Greg gave a C grade, said it wasn't a great move. Mike Conley has played horribly. Additionally, this team picked up Emmanuel Mudiay and Jeff Green. Emmanuel Mudiay is a player that we have thought was horrible. We thought he was decent-ish as a replacement-level player last season for the Knicks, but now is playing horribly. And Jeff Green is just one of these players that we've thought is horrible his whole career. So now we're watching the Utah Jazz with Rudy Gobert, Donovan Mitchell actually playing well, wasting stuff by having horrible players they picked up in the offseason. And it is just infuriates us, Brian, when we have players we actually like and their GMs just, I've called it anti-Moneyball. And specifically against the Houston Rockets, but I guess the Jazz apply too. It's like, If you get a great core of a couple players, you just need to get decent filler players. I've also called this the Derek Fisher principle. Derek Fisher being a key member of 4 or 5 Los Angeles Lakers title runs. And the key being he was never a fantastic player, but he was a good player. I mean, he did have like a really good playoffs, I think, in 2001. But the key was Derek Fisher was a perfectly good player, a perfectly serviceable starting point guard. And if you've got Shaq and Kobe and Pau Gasol, Lamar Odom and Kobe, you don't need a great point guard. You just need a decent one. And so when we have teams where we're like, you've got Rudy Gobert and back in the day, Derek Favors and Ricky Rubio, you just need a couple of reasonable players to go around them and they don't get him. It is infuriating. And the Jazz, it's like whack-a-mole, right? Like Donovan Mitchell pops up. We're like, you're no longer a problem. And they're like, yeah, but we're going to get Jeff Green and Emmanuel Mudiay.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not as worried about those two just because they're not going to be, as important in the playoff rotation. It's going to be more about their big guys. Mike Conley, though, obviously he's their starting point guard, so they do have to hope that the age curve hasn't gotten to him yet. And it has just been a few games, right? So 7 games so far for Donovan Mitchell, but he does look like an MVP. Here's the thing about it, though. He's done it mostly with his shooting so far. He's at 54% on twos and 44% on threes, 61% true shooting total. Like, that's a big step up from his, career. So, so we'll have to see if he can keep it. I'm sorry, 68% true shooting. This player page is messing me up. Sorry about that, Dre. Let's stick to the team page. 61% true shooting, so he's gone down 7% in the last few games. So he's got to keep that shooting up, right? And we're going to have to see, is there some coaching reason or player adjustment reason or whatever why he's shooting better, or is it just a small sample size? We'll have to see how that goes.
Yeah, and I mean, actually, I forgot to bring that overall point that we brought up. And I thank you for kind of doing a good litmus test that I've used in past, which is if you go to Basketball Reference at their seasons summary page, well, they show the SRS of every team. And right now, this is surprising, out east, the Miami Heat have the best SRS in the NBA at plus 14.33. And also out east, the worst SRS in the NBA is the Chicago Bulls at negative 11.24. And if you just go to, say, last season as an example, the best SRS squad in the NBA was the Milwaukee Bucks at plus 8, and the worst team in the NBA, the Cleveland Cavaliers, at negative 9. So you'll notice our numbers, we're starting to normalize a little, but we're still reasonably outside the bounds of what we expect in kind of a normal-ish NBA season. And so you've always noticed that with SRSs when we're looking week to week, that when the SRSs aren't normal for the squads, we still have to wait for things to kind of calm down. So I think you are absolutely right when I'm like super high or super low on any player to note that we just have to wait a while. And in fact, you're quoting me back to me because I did a Michael Jordan meme today, and I was like, anytime you see someone say, comparing a 10-game set of games in this season to season-long averages, because, they'll say something like, Luka Doncic is the first player since Michael Jordan to be averaging 25, 5, and 10 or whatever, right? And you're like, it's less than 10 games. It's like, if he does it through 40, we can start talking about if he's going to do it for the season. But for F stakes, we're not comparing seasons yet. It's 10 games. So that's where we're at.
I will say, though, I hope that Donovan Mitchell does end up being the real deal. He, keeps charming me with his nice guy ways on social media and in other places, so I'm rooting for him as a person. So that's something. But I'll have to say, even though this looks like a victory for the eye test so far, we also have, another guy who was loved by everyone, even though he said his numbers sucked. Porzingis has not lived up to that so far. So for every Donovan Mitchell, there's a million other guys who just fail at the stats test versus the eye test.
It's just, I get so incensed by that logic where people are like, see, I told you. It's actually a fun game I wish I could play, which is you go back in time and look at how high people are, because it's like there are promising young players every season. I mean, I call it Remember the Linsanity for a reason, because people were comparing Jeremy Lin to Michael Jordan. And Jeremy Lin ended up his career as a reasonable Derek Fisher starting point guard that just couldn't stay healthy, which is the unfortunate truth. Like, his health He just was banged up too much, and eventually, he won too many teams, got sick of him being injured, and he's not in the NBA anymore. So it's going, don't overreact and don't think that because you like the player, you're right, unless you're keeping tally and saying every player you like, because everybody gives good draft grades every year, right? We have all of these teams that draft great players, and it's like 4 of them turn into good NBA players per season. So I think that's a good point.
And just real fast, that's why I brought up the shooting, if we're thinking about Mitchell as a regression candidate, right? If he's up like everywhere across the board, and we can say, wow, there's reasons for this, right? Like, for instance, we might talk about Brogdon a little bit later, and we're going to see some reasons to think Brogdon's the real deal. But for Mitchell, he's just kind of going crazy from three-point shooting, right? Is he going to be able to shoot 45%, for the whole year? Maybe. Steph Curry did it, but not too many players have. So that's why I'm worried about his regression. Because let's look at it this way. When Ricky Rubio was hurt last year, he was kind of dragooned into playing some point guard and whatnot. And, maybe that's an area where he can develop similar to Brogdon, but he's back to playing shooting guard this year. And I'm just not seeing, and he's always kind of been good on defense, right? And that's been about the same. So I'm not seeing like big growth statistically from him. So that's why I'm kind of waiting to see what the coaching people say.
All right. Yeah, I agree. That's a good take. And we'll be checking in. But
I'm rooting for you, Donovan.
I agree. I mean, Melo was a similar player too, where it's this player that I regularly bash their statistics, and you're like, but their off the court stuff is so nice, and it seems like other stuff. And I agree, Donovan Mitchell seems in the same boat. So, yeah, it is nice when players you don't like, both on and off the court, you can be mad at, and players you do like, both on and off the court, like Steve Nash, right? Steve Nash is great. Need more Steve Nashes.
There is a video of Steve Nash playing basketball in a suit and tie on a playground court in the last few weeks. Check
love
that
it.
out.
All right, I will definitely have to look for that. I mean, I miss you, Steve Nash. You were great in the NBA. As I mentioned with Greg Steele's post, because some moves hadn't happened in the offseason when he gave us them, I filled in a couple, and one was Vince Carter to the Hawks. And from a basketball standpoint, I can't say that's a great move, but from a fan of basketball standpoint, I was like, I don't want an NBA without Vince Carter. So if you sign Vince Carter, you get an A from me because I don't want him just yet. Speaking of pleasant surprises like Vince Carter still being in the NBA, Luka Doncic, man, is keeping it up. I think I noticed the other day he's one of 2 players since 2001 to score 5 threes in a game, 14 rebounds, 15 assists. The other player is future MVPer James Harden. So Luka Doncic is putting up some great numbers and playing special, and he was one of our favorites. So that is great. I just wanted to throw that out there, something that has surprised me pleasantly. Dwight Howard is looking really good on the Lakers. He is, he's put up a couple like double games where he's missed all of his free throws, which is just such a Dwight thing to do. The way I phrased this is, let's hope that this is Shaq in Miami, not Shaq on Boston. Because for those that forget, Shaquille O'Neal ended his career on Boston. He came on, was looking really good to start, then just got injured and couldn't keep it up. So here's hoping that Dwight can stay healthy and help that team because, the Lakers are looking good again. Shocker, Anthony Davis is really good at basketball, and their best player right now is this guy called LeBron James. Maybe you've heard of him. So that's another pleasant surprise. And then I wanted to give a few shout-outs to some of Patrick's Vegas predictions. Phoenix, Patrick grudgingly took Phoenix to make the playoffs, and they're playing really good, and it's really weird, and I don't know what to do with that. And that's including with Ayton being out for failing a drug test. So I don't know what's going on. Patrick also made a very astute observation that he loves the Clippers in the playoffs, but for the regular season, the over was tough because he doesn't buy that Kawhi Leonard is going to be on the court as much as he was in past. Kind of this the very thing we started the show off, right? Managing minutes and managing wear and tear on star players. And lo and behold, 5 games into the season, Kawhi Leonard sat out a key game because of rest. So Patrick is looking pretty smart so far. Hopefully the aggregate is all of his picks look good because, already some bad bounces have come, right? The Golden State Warriors aren't getting the over. They're not making the playoffs. But some of his other picks are looking good, and they're looking good following his logic. So that'll be fun if that pans out.
Yeah, and some other teams, man, these Miami Heat are, in fact, number 1 in margin of victory, SRS, and everything. And I'm interested in – I'm going to bring them up right now, Dre. Let's get into the Heat. Why are the Heat so good through 6 or 7 games here?
How's this Jimmy Butler fellow looking? I hear he's good at basketball.
He's not really playing right now, but Bam Adebayo looks really good. And who else?
I'm cut you out before we do analysis to actually take the exact opposite take. So the funny part is when we started the show and I was talking stupid masculinity, I almost talked Jimmy Butler because Jimmy Butler apparently got upset with Kevin Love for insulting his workout regimen. Because I think like Jimmy Butler is like, I'm in the gym at 4:30 in the morning. And it's like, dude, keeping yourself rested and in shape is good too. Yeah. This weird mentality of I have to work harder than everybody else proves something. We don't like that. And we've heard that Jimmy Butler, has gotten into fights with other teammates on like Philadelphia and Minnesota because he's upset with younger players because he's basically said these younger players don't take the game seriously like I do. And it's going, this odd macho mentality isn't necessarily productive to anybody. That being said, Jimmy Butler missed the first game of the season because he went to see his child being born, and this was on the advice of Erik Spoelstra. Erik Spoelstra was like, it's a basketball game, man. Go see your kid get born. Certain things in life are important. And Jimmy Butler even said, he's like, yeah, when Spoelstra told me that was huge, and he's right. It put things in perspective, right? One game of basketball versus, a memory about your child forever. It's a huge difference. So a shout out to Spoelstra and Jimmy Butler for that, because that exact thing, whenever you see sports pundits come out and insult a player for missing a day of work to go see their kid get born, you should rightfully get maddened. And so good on Jimmy Butler and Erik Spoelstra for playing great. And to your point, Jimmy Butler has played half the minutes of Bam Adebayo, the MVP of the Heat. But in the 93 minutes Jimmy Butler has played, he has played spectacularly and is the fourth most productive player on the team in terms of total wins produced.
Yeah, and the Heat do seem to be doing it with defense. They're third in D rating. And, their bigs are playing well. Myers Leonard is finally starting to look good for them. He wasn't that great on the the Portland Trailblazers. So, yeah, we'll see if the Heat can keep it up. But another player getting a lot of credit for them is Kendrick Nunn. He's scoring a lot of points, but he's not very efficient. So we'll see how that goes. A lot of people like Harrow, the rookie shooting guard. Yeah, we'll see how the Heat do.
Myers Leonard is an interesting one. As noted, Greg gave him a D grade, and I can't fault this because, as an example, in 2016-2017, Myers Leonard plays over 1,000 minutes in Portland and is just god-awful, stinks up the joint. Apologies for that. Text message for you, sir. In 2018, he only plays 254 minutes, albeit great, and in 2019, he plays 878 minutes at a reasonable rate. But again, our sample size of Myers Leonard is 2 seasons of horrible, 2 seasons of not enough minutes, and this was the player that they basically replaced Hassan Whiteside with. So, or not Hassan Whiteside, sorry, I like Yusuf Nurkic. So it's like Myers Leonard is coming in to fill the void left by Yusuf Nurkic, and you're like, well, he's either not on the court or horrible, so what are we getting? So you're right, he has started off spectacularly, and here's hoping he can keep it up. One interesting note, shout out to Paul DeVos, DataVox21 again, who's been doing a lot of research on Twitter about player health and stuff. And one of the biggest things he was bringing up in relation to Zion Williamson is just big, heavy players do not tend to stay healthy. Like Shaquille O'Neal is our best example of one, and he is a player that was not able to stay healthy like we were just mentioning. Myers Leonard is a 7-footer who's over 250 pounds. So he's starting the season good. We'll see if he's able to keep that up.
Yeah, and some interesting things he was saying today was that, I'm paraphrasing, so I hope I get this somewhat right, that basically players who have really big growth spurts instead of being consistent growers tend to have problems too. And he brought up an example that Zion Williamson said he gained 100 pounds in 2 years. Like that's a lot of extra weight in a short amount of time, and your tendons and your ligaments have to deal with that. One example that was brought up is that Greg Oden, one of the most famous big men who was incredible college career but was injured and never able to play in the NBA really any substantial amount of minutes because of his injuries. It was brought up that he grew so fast that one of his tendons disconnected in his leg without an injury just because it grew so fast. Like, that's crazy. So, yeah, just being big does put stress on your body.
And yeah, so we'll have to see. Yeah, this team is off to a good start, but they've got some age and injury concern. But if they keep it up, I'll be happy with that as well. Any other teams you want to look at? I'm actually feeling good. I know we're not going a normal hour and a half.
We're right about an hour, so we can get. Yeah, I mean, Malcolm Brogdon again. Man, he looks great. I was just gonna say is the Pacers haven't quite played as well as we thought, but Brogdon himself is looking good, and I think the Pacers will be okay this year.
Yeah, that is. Thank you for letting me get that hate in before it can subside, because I think you've noticed I've said.
Oh, what hates that?
It is maddening that a team that won 60 games let a player of Malcolm Brogdon's caliber out the door. And with how he's playing in Indiana, it's like, give me a break. Now, what they basically did is they let Malcolm Brogdon walk and traded him essentially for a future first-round and second-round pick from the Pacers. The Pacers are a perennial playoff team, so that's not even a great pick. I mean, one of our most famous examples is Kawhi Leonard. So Kawhi Leonard was picked with the best non-lottery playoff pick by the Spurs, and the Spurs just traded up for it. So it's like bullshit if you don't think the Milwaukee Bucks, if they needed a 15 through 30 pick, couldn't just trade for it in the future and a future second round pick. And they also basically saved about $20 million because they picked up Wesley Matthews to like a veteran minimum, which is like $2.6 million, as opposed to Malcolm Brogdon, who was like $21 million. So they basically saved about $19 million, and got two future picks that the take we've had on the show forever is that future picks are basically worthless. If you're not able to win now. Like, basically, we are fully behind Sam Hinkie picks in that if you can get rid of bad players and acquire second round and future first round picks, absolutely. One thing that we think is a good idea, the Boston Celtics did this right, is you trade down, right? You get the number one pick in the draft. You trade it for the number 3 pick and a future first round pick from the team you traded that number one pick to. And that team that gets the number 1 pick thinks they're going to be great, and likely they're not. And so you get another first round pick in the future, right? So we are fully behind that kind of logic, but trading a productive player for picks is a horrible, horrible maneuver in our opinion. And that is exactly what the Bucks in the midst of a dynasty run possibly did, because they won 60 games. They have the best player in the league in Giannis, and they did that, and it is maddening. And a funny note is Giannis has said if the Bucks don't turn things around when his contract is up in 2 seasons, he's going to look elsewhere. Hey, funny note, this team called the Los Angeles Lakers has this pretty good player named Anthony Davis and is going to have like a $30 million hole when LeBron James's contract is up. Whoever could they target? So the Bucks made a colossally stupid move, and it is frustrating. It is extra frustrating to me because I live in the state of Wisconsin, and our former Republican, remember this party that says they're fiscally conservative? I am bitter, Brian. Gave a quarter of a billion, I almost said million, Brian, $250 million either loan or tax subsidy to a billionaire, again, billionaire, what the hell is that, to build a new stadium for the Bucks, and they can't even keep a competitive team, right? They have a good competitive team, and they're starting to shed dollars. And this is always the frustrating thing about professional sports teams that are publicly subsidized. It's like you are really just you are loaning money to a billionaire who then shoves it in a bank. It is maddening. So I am mad that the Bucks are wasting the window of a good player, just like the Rockets and the Utah Jazz that we mentioned before. I am mad from a taxpayer perspective because essentially my tax-paying money went to a billionaire, and the billionaire is like, I don't want to spend my money on a good team, but I'll take your money for a stadium. So it is maddening on so many fronts. Thank you for letting me rant about that.
Yeah, it's very similar to the Warriors situation, right? And although the Warriors did finance their own stadium, I'll give them that. But of course, the city has to make sure the land is okay and do all the permitting and all that. That's still a pain in the ass. But no, here's the bottom line is not only are they, cutting costs and, not trying to put the best team out there that they can, they just chose the wrong players, right? They said, we think the Lopez brothers and Chris Middleton, those are just more important players to us than Malcolm Brogdon. And they were just wrong. Like, Brogdon was much more important, and they should have kept him.
And there were players of the Lopez brothers caliber on the market. I'm missing them off the top of my head, but like Derek Favors as an example went, right? Like you could have acquired a player like Derek Favors instead of re-signing Brook Lopez to $12 million a season. You could have done a sign trade, something like that, and they did not. So Yeah, it is what it is. It lets me keep my Schadenfreude of the Bucks alive, so that's good. I am still a huge Giannis fan. I do have a weird like tangential shout out. So if you have anything else on the NBA, I'll let you wrap that up. Then we can get into shout outs and that'll be our show.
No, we're good. Go ahead with yours.
So weird note. So I don't know if you heard about this. WWE went to Saudi Arabia and it wound up in a bizarre scenario because what happened was basically the star people like Vince McMahon, the owner of the WWE, Brock Lesnar, one of the biggest names in the WWE, Hulk Hogan, these big names were able to fly themselves on their private jets. The rest of the staff was not. And so what ended up happening is WWE goes out there and it was supposed to be televised in Saudi Arabia, but Vince McMahon allegedly pulled the feed because there was another contract dispute over some money that he was owed from the same television company from a previous engagement. This upset, I think I'm saying this right, so please look this up because I'm saying this from memory off of stuff I've read today. I'm giving you this like a 60%. I believe I'm quoting the right thing. The Crown Prince got upset at WWE and basically held up the wrestlers that were supposed to be coming home on basically like a commercial flight because he was upset for the video feed being pulled. And then so some of these wrestlers basically got together and booked a charter flight home for themselves because they were going to miss, the way WWE works, right? Is they have these big shows and they also have weekly tapings, Raw and SmackDown, which are filmed on Monday and Thursday. So they basically got their own charter jet to get themselves home. And apparently Vince McMahon was throwing shade at the wrestlers who did not do that, saying some wrestlers cared more than others. And so maddening situation on many fronts, right? When $1 billion company isn't able to pay for their athletes to have, good flights and then basically tries to shame them for not spending their own money, it gets very frustrating. Dave Meltzer of the Wrestling Observer actually came in and said this might be a good time for WWE wrestlers to think about unionizing. And that was, to me, very fascinating, right? We're looking at the NCAA and players finally possibly getting paid for their likeness. Racism doesn't die, though, so it's going to be a long-fought battle. The Republican Party of tax cuts has come out to say, hell, if African-American athletes are going to get paid for their likeness in college, we're going to find ways to tax them. Weird that, right? But, basically, if $1 billion company can't take care of its workers, should the workers unionize? And we're seeing stuff like that in the NCAA happen. So it'd be very interesting if there was some kind of movement in wrestling. For those that don't forget, in the 80s, Hulk Hogan basically squashed an attempt by Jesse the Body Ventura, who went on to be the governor of Minnesota. He squashed an attempt by him to unionize the wrestlers. And Vince McMahon has basically just abused his labor by calling them independent contractors, not paying for health insurance, doing bullshit stuff like this, like making them pay for their own flights. So if wrestling got unionized, that could be very interesting and would be a thing we're pulling for.
Yeah, and of course, famously right now, some of the other promotions are starting to build up and provide competition and, take wrestlers away from WWE, and which, happened back in the early 90s. They were competing against WCW, who they ended up buying out and burying, right? So, it just keeps going in cycles. And I haven't heard a lot about all these Saudi Arabia contracts, and apparently it's been resolved and extended out until 2027 now. But I don't know. The way things are going, this kind of seems like money laundering to me, Dre. Like Saudi Arabia is just trying to get as much money into the U.S. to buy influence as they can. And
I need to research that because that's an interesting take. Because I know, for instance, another thing about the WWE is they have this like $4 billion deal with Fox, and they are doing terribly. And I don't know the specifics of the deal, but, a big company like Fox, if they're able to get out of that, they'll get out of that if it stays horrible.
Yeah, but Saudi Arabia is trying to, buy influence in the United States. And this is going to come up actually in the in the hearings that are coming up in the next few months. Is famously they paid the National Enquirer to put out, pro-Saudi Arabia magazines, and that's kind of what they've been doing. But it's a complicated situation. I mean, one of the guys they've been pushing the most there is Mansour, who was a local guy here from Oakland, the former Manny Favorino. And, he's just a super chill Oakland guy, laid back and, trained at Stoner U Dojo. That's where his wrestling school is, Dre. And he, what he said is, look, things are getting better here, and we finally had a women's match, and it's not quite what we want, but, we're trying to make progress. And it's tough in this day and age, right? It's same thing with China, right? With China and the NBA, people like LeBron are saying, oh, well, we have to try to do business. And this is kind of always been an old idea, is that if we can get, capitalism and democracy into China, then it will, spread its influence and there'll be less authoritarianism. Whereas now it seems like the opposite is happening, that authoritarianism in, China, Russia, and Saudi Arabia is instead filtering back to us in the United States. So things are complicated.
I am wicked impressed by you, because I was waiting. I don't know if people watch the video show. I was like rubbing my hands, getting ready to make a really intelligent point, and you made it instead. And it wasn't even my point. So the Exponent podcast, which I have shouted out before, they talked a lot about this, about China, the NBA, and authoritarianism. And that exact point you just said, this weird notion that capitalism will spread democracy to new markets that we get into without thinking the alternative, which is authoritarianism will filter back. So yeah, this guy's saying, oh, it's great, Saudi Arabia let us have a women's match. It's like, okay, but what happens if, as you were saying, what happens if they become one of the biggest money buyers in the WWE, right? What happens if Fox finds a way to back out of their deal or cancel early, and Saudi Arabia is the biggest money driver, and they say, hey, we don't want women on the show. What do you think WWE is going to do? So when you say it's complicated, I mean, the troubling thing about the Saudi Arabia stuff going on to me was exactly what you're saying. If they start pulling the strings behind WWE and forcing that, you always have to ask yourself as a business with your clients how much sway they have over you and if you're comfortable with that. And China and Saudi Arabia are two places that you really should question. Is the money really worth the potential trade-off?
Yeah, and we'll find out. I mean, I don't have an answer, really. Women are driving in Saudi Arabia now, but also, a year ago, a Washington Post journalist was executed by the Crown Prince, Khashoggi. So, yeah, we'll see.
Well, that was a nice happy note to end the show on. I'll let that be the show and head to the outro. Brian, this has been the Boxscore Geeks Show. If you've met us not through the website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. We go live usually around 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, twitch.tv/nerd numbers. If you missed the live show, you can catch recaps at channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. Of course, we have this in podcast form. The Boxscore Geeks Show, iTunes and Stitcher. Subscribe, vote us up. It helps us out. I've been your host, Ray Alvarez, a.k.a. Nerd Numbers. With me, as always, Boxscore Brian on Twitter, Brian Foster on the show. With us in spirit, Patrick Minton on Twitter as NBA Geek. Hope your week goes good. Hope your team wins unless you want them to tank. And if not, we'll see you next week.